You can sleep beside someone every night, share a bed, a bathroom, a bank account, and still feel like you're emotionally alone. You can know their coffee order, their mother's birthday, the exact way they take their shoes off after work, and still lie awake next to them wondering if they actually know you. This is one of the strangest and most underdiscussed forms of pain that exists, loneliness inside a relationship. It doesn't look like the loneliness we expect. There's no empty apartment, no silence at the end of the night, no obvious absence. In fact, from the outside, everything looks fine. You go on dates. You split chores. You post the anniversary photo. And yet, somewhere underneath all of it, there's a quiet ache that says, I don't feel seen here. Psychologists have a name for this. It's called emotional loneliness, and it's distinct from social loneliness, which is simply the lack of people around you. Emotional loneliness is the lack of a specific kind of connection, the feeling that no one truly understands your inner world, even if you're surrounded by people, even if you're partnered, even if you're loved. And research on loneliness consistently shows something counterintuitive. You can be surrounded by people and still score high on loneliness scales, because loneliness isn't about proximity. It's about the quality of felt connection. So today, we're going to explore why this happens inside relationships specifically, how two people who genuinely love each other can slowly drift into emotional distance without ever having a single dramatic fight about it. We'll look at the psychological mechanism behind this quiet erosion, and then we'll walk through the actual, practical ways to identify what's missing and begin rebuilding intimacy, not through some huge romantic gesture, but through small, consistent moments that most couples overlook entirely. If you've ever felt this, the strange loneliness of being loved but not known, I want you to know two things right away. First, it's far more common than people admit, because it doesn't come with an obvious cause, so most people suffer through it quietly, assuming something is uniquely wrong with them or their relationship. And second, it's usually not a sign that the relationship is broken. It's a sign that a specific kind of maintenance has been missing. Understanding that difference changes everything about how you respond to it. Let's start with how this actually happens, because the mechanism is almost invisible in real time. It rarely announces itself. Nobody wakes up one day and decides to stop being emotionally present with their partner. Instead, it happens through 1,000 tiny substitutions, moments where real connection quietly gets replaced with something that looks like connection but isn't. Stick with me, because once you understand this mechanism, you'll probably start recognizing it in your own relationship, your friendships, maybe even in the way you talk to your own family. And more importantly, once you can see it, you can begin to reverse it. Here's the psychological mechanism at the heart of this. Emotional loneliness develops when connection becomes superficial, when the relationship keeps functioning on a logistical level while quietly stopping on an emotional one. Think about what a long-term relationship actually requires day to day. Coordinating schedules. Managing a household. Making decisions about money, family, plans. All of this is real, necessary work, and couples get remarkably good at it. But here's the problem. This kind of communication is transactional. It's about managing life together, not about knowing each other. And transactional communication can completely take over a relationship without either person noticing, because it feels productive. It feels like connection, because you're talking constantly. But you're talking about the schedule, not about the self. Researchers who study intimacy, including the psychologist Harry Rees, have described this in terms of something called the intimacy process model. The core idea is that emotional intimacy isn't built by simply spending time together or exchanging information. It's built through a specific cycle. One person shares something vulnerable, a fear, a hope, an insecurity, a need, and the other person responds in a way that makes them feel understood, validated, and cared for. When this cycle happens repeatedly over time, intimacy deepens. When it stops happening, even if the relationship continues functioning perfectly well on the surface, intimacy quietly starves. And this is the key insight: the absence of conflict is not the same as the presence of connection. Many couples mistake a lack of arguing for a sign of relational health. But you can go years without a real fight simply because neither of you is bringing up anything real anymore. Silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's just two people who've stopped risking vulnerability with each other. This connects to a second piece of the mechanism: unspoken needs. Humans are, generally, not very good at directly stating their emotional needs. We're taught, often from childhood, that needing things from other people is somehow a burden, a weakness, or an imposition. So instead of saying, "I need reassurance right now," or "I feel disconnected from you lately," we drop hints. We get quiet. We wait to see if our partner notices. And when they don't, not because they don't care, but because they're not mind readers, we quietly conclude that they don't understand us. That conclusion, repeated enough times, hardens into a belief: I can't really be known here. That belief is the seed of chronic loneliness inside a relationship. Attachment research adds another layer to this. According to attachment theory, first developed by John Bowlby and later expanded by researchers like Sue Johnson in the context of adult relationships, humans have a built-in need for what's called a secure base, a person we can turn to for emotional safety, especially under stress. When partners stop turning toward each other during moments of stress or vulnerability, even in small, everyday ways, the nervous system starts to register the relationship as less safe, even if nothing dramatic has happened. Over time, both partners may start protecting themselves instead of opening up, which only deepens the distance. It becomes a slow, self-reinforcing loop: less vulnerability leads to less understanding leads to less safety, and less safety leads to even less vulnerability. The good news is that because this pattern is built from small moments, it can also be rebuilt from small moments. You don't need a dramatic turnaround. You need to interrupt the loop with consistent, deliberate acts of real connection. Let's talk about how. The first step in rebuilding emotional intimacy is learning to identify exactly what kind of connection is missing, because "I feel disconnected" is often too vague to act on. Psychologists who study relationships often describe several distinct types of intimacy, and it's rarely the case that all of them have vanished at once. Usually, one or two specific ones have quietly eroded while others remain intact. There's emotional intimacy, the sense that you can share your inner feelings and be met with understanding rather than judgment. There's intellectual intimacy, the experience of exchanging ideas, curiosity, and perspective, not just information. There's experiential intimacy, built through shared activities and novel experiences together, not just routine ones. And there's physical intimacy, which includes but isn't limited to sex. It also includes casual touch, closeness, and affection that isn't goal-oriented. A simple but powerful exercise here is to ask yourself, which of these feels present in my relationship right now, and which feels like it's been running on autopilot or missing entirely? Often, people discover that their relationship still has plenty of physical closeness and logistical teamwork, but almost no emotional or intellectual intimacy, no real exchange of inner thoughts, no curiosity about who the other person is becoming. Naming the specific gap turns a vague, overwhelming feeling of loneliness into something concrete and workable. Once you've identified the gap, the second technique is what researchers often call turning toward, a term popularized by relationship researcher John Gottman, based on decades of observing real couples. Gottman's research found that partners regularly make small bids for connection throughout the day: a comment, a sigh, a "hey, look at this," and what predicts long-term relationship health isn't the grand romantic gestures, it's whether these small bids get met with attention or get ignored. Couples who consistently turn toward each other's bids, even in minor ways, were dramatically more likely to stay together and report satisfaction years later, compared to couples who let those bids slide. This means rebuilding intimacy doesn't require some big vulnerable conversation right away, which can actually feel intimidating and artificial if you try to force it. Instead, it starts with simply noticing and responding to the small bids your partner already makes. When they say, "You won't believe what happened today," put the phone down and actually engage, instead of half listening. When they sigh heavily after a long day, ask what's going on instead of letting it pass. These moments feel tiny individually, but they accumulate into a felt sense of, "my person notices me," which is the emotional foundation loneliness erodes. The third technique is learning to voice needs directly instead of waiting to be understood. This is uncomfortable for most people, because it can feel exposing to say plainly, "I've been feeling distant from you lately, and I miss talking about real things, not just logistics." But indirect hints rarely work, precisely because your partner isn't inside your head. A useful, low-pressure way to start is to build in a small, recurring ritual, something as simple as a nightly check-in where you each share one high point and one low point from the day, or a weekly walk with no phones where the unspoken rule is you talk about something other than errands and schedules. The goal isn't a dramatic heart-to-heart. It's regularity. Intimacy is less like a single deep conversation and more like a muscle. It strengthens through repeated, low-stakes use, not through one intense workout followed by months of silence. What's worth remembering here is that emotional loneliness inside a relationship is almost never a sign that you chose the wrong person, or that love has quietly died. In most cases, it's a sign that connection got outpaced by logistics, that somewhere along the way, managing life together took over the time and attention that used to go toward actually knowing each other. And because it develops slowly, through small omissions rather than one big rupture, it can also be repaired slowly, through small, consistent acts of turning toward each other again. This matters because so many people, when they feel this kind of loneliness, jump straight to catastrophic conclusions, that the relationship is failing, that they've fallen out of love, that something is fundamentally wrong. And sometimes that's worth examining honestly. But very often, what's actually happening is far more ordinary and far more fixable. Two people who still care about each other have simply stopped practicing the small habits that make caring feel felt. The relationship doesn't need to be rebuilt from the ground up. It needs the emotional equivalent of regular maintenance, the check-ins, the noticing, the small bids for connection that got lost somewhere in the schedule. If there's one thing to take from this, it's that you don't need a dramatic conversation tonight, and you don't need to fix everything at once. Start smaller than feels sufficient. Ask your partner one real question today, not, "How was your day?" but something that requires an actual answer, like, "What's something you've been thinking about that you haven't said out loud?" Notice one small bid for connection this week and actually turn toward it instead of letting it pass. That's it. That's the beginning. Intimacy isn't rebuilt in a single moment of vulnerability, it's rebuilt in the accumulation of small moments where two people choose, again and again, to actually show up for each other. And if you recognized yourself in any part of this video, if you've ever felt that particular kind of lonely that only exists when you're lying next to someone you love, you're not alone in that feeling, even though it feels like the loneliest thing in the world. It's one of the most common, least talked about experiences in long-term relationships, and understanding it is the first real step toward changing it. If this helped you understand something about your own relationship a little more clearly, consider subscribing. This channel is dedicated to breaking down the psychology behind the everyday experiences we rarely have language for, from love and connection to identity and mental health. New videos come out every week, and I'd love to have you along for the next one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.